Hey everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the OSINT Hellhole. Here today, I'm joined by Zach, my co-host,
Hello.
and we do have quite a set of interesting topics today, going from towed artillery to Poland finally buying its new infantry fighting vehicle, the appearance of a new FrankenSAM, FTX 40 tests, a PrSM contract, and then of course the big NGET contract last week. We'll then round out this episode by talking about the last 2 weeks of Ukraine aid and our single viewer submitted question. So, starting off, we do have the Bodana B primarily for this segment because we had a video yesterday, a video report yesterday from Build, which went to a Ukrainian training ground in which we finally got our first footage of the system firing. In and of itself, it's really just a new gun placed on what looks to be an existing 2A36 Hyacinth B chassis. So it's going to be interesting to see how these perform at the front compared to either the legacy Soviet systems they're replacing or the US M777, which has been doing work in Ukraine for the past 3 years. But I'd also like to just briefly go over the current production status of the 2S22 family as a whole. Because we've also had an interview with the chief of Ukraine's gunsmith committee, in which he stated that the main production bottleneck at the moment is the ability for them to procure truck chassis. Which, seeing as Tatra, which is the main provider for the truck chassis that's being used on the Mod 4 variant, which is currently in production, is practically tapped out in capacity for the next 3 years, is understandable. For just as an example, Tetra also delivers rolling chassis to other truck manufacturers like DAF, and they've basically been contracted out for the next 3 years, which means that Ukraine is in the process of looking to spin up production on a second truck chassis. From which manufacturer this is going to be is at the moment not known. But what we can expect is that they're going to ramp up production of the Bodana B in the meantime, because they have the barrels to do so. Overall, currently, I estimate 2S22 production to be at least 218 units built in total, 21 lost, which gives us 197 in service. This is likely an underestimation because for last year, my estimation put the production number at 134, while Ukraine stated this to be at 154 or 20 units higher. I am stuck to basically estimating production from the latest disclosed production number, which was 18, and that number has likely increased since. Going on
So
to
I had a question about
yep, go
the
ahead.
2S22. So in terms of production per month, what are we now looking at? Do you think it has increased substantially over the last few times we did the podcast, which was in 2024, I believe, early 2024, where we came to I think you told me that the production was almost, was it like 72 units a year? Like it was nearing the production level that the French were planning to produce their Caesar systems at. So has it increased since then,
It
or is
it
it
has overtaken Caesar in production
okay? That's a lot.
because last time we talked, and I think you're here referring to when we went to visit that museum,
Yeah.
I mentioned that Ukraine was producing 8 units a month, which was for March 24.
Yeah.
In April, we got an announcement that they reached 10 units a month, and in
Wow.
October 24, that had increased to 18.
Wow. Yeah. That is substantially more than I expected. That is almost double the production capacity we were discussing back in early 2024. That is kind of incredible for a nation at war. Constantly, it's really difficult to run production facilities while you're constantly being bombarded by Russian missiles night and day. So it's an incredible task and really speaks to the ingenuity and how hard the Ukrainian workforce is going during this like war, and the fact that they can do that. When you compare that to what the relative production of equivalent systems in the West have been, but the production has been rather low, even though we are looking at like once in a generation style increase in a lot of these systems because of the demand that is going through the roof. It is still way below what we're seeing here with the 2S22. That is incredible.
I'd also like to add that during the interview that the chief of the Ukrainian Gunsmith Committee gave, he also mentioned that they could potentially fulfill a contract for, and he said, 115 units in 2 to 3 months if we had the required trucks.
Incredible. So this would mean that
So that would
the
mean at
limiting.
the low end a 40 unit per month production capacity if they had no bottlenecks.
Wow. So the major bottleneck here would be then trucks to basically mount these systems on.
Yes, which is why they are looking into spinning up production on a second truck chassis from a different manufacturer.
Incredible. You'd kind of expect Western systems to kind of also follow a similar trend, but then you remember that the West has at least in Europe, there's like an incredibly large automotive industry, and a lot of it is sitting idle right now. So taking advantage of that, one would imagine the kind of production they could be outputting for systems such as the Archer and things like the RCH 150, I believe, 155, yeah, and systems of that sort. But you'd kind of expect production increases that we're seeing in Ukraine, but they're just really not there.
The main bottleneck for Europe as a whole is basically contract volumes.
Hmm.
Defense industry wants to and could potentially scale to, and this is an example that I can bring up because it's from interview with the CEO of KMW, where he
Mhm.
stated that the company could, if demand exists and contracts are awarded, increase production of the Leopard 2 over a period of 12 to 24 months to 200 units a year
That is incredible.
from the current 50. However, and we have to realistically look at the expected order book, we are not seeing potential contracts for more than about 400 main battle tanks.
Hmm.
Which means that KMW has to ask itself, do we increase production now and work for 2 years, or do we keep our current production for 50 units a year and work for 8 years?
Yeah, this is the biggest dilemma when it comes to production capacity increases in modern times. This is something that always comes up when people discuss things like ships, artillery, missiles, things of that sort, which is the budget, despite the ever-changing security environment that keeps on deteriorating, the budgets are not increasing in a manner that is commensurate to the threat. And a lot of these companies are wondering, or I'd rather say they're afraid of what has happened in the past 35 years, where it's like, should you increase production in the hopes that there will be more buys, or should you be cautious and try to sustain yourself on the current order books as long as possible, which is how a lot of these companies have basically survived for the past 25 to 35 years. So yeah, that's a big dilemma, and I'm kind of surprised European nations are not making it clear to defense companies that there is a huge interest, given the security environment.
Another thing I'd like to add here is that the militaries don't look like they used to look like. Conscription practically across all of Europe is dead. And even with current security threats, I do not see it coming back, which means that no one really has the appetite to contract 5, 6, 700 main battle tanks, say, except for Poland, who is doing it gradually and at great expense, but also really needs to re equip its armed forces from T-72 platforms. There's no one really in Europe that can drive the needed procurement to get the capacity increases going, because Germany has practically contracted its entire main battle tank deficit at 123 units already.
Yeah.
There's,
But like
except
for
for it
me,
standing up new formations, it doesn't have a need to procure more tanks because politicians don't want defense equipment sitting rusting in hangars.
except for the fact that that has been one of the saving graces in for Ukraine in this war, taking equipment that have been sitting for 30, 45 years rusting in storehouses all around Western Europe and refurbishing them for the cause that they were originally designed for. So yeah, I'm kind of surprised. But then when you look at like the situation when it comes to tanks versus artillery, I would say that it should be a bit different, even though it's not. Uh, Comparatively speaking, a lot of Western nations have way less artillery systems than they should be, and these systems are far cheaper than traditional main battle tanks, which can cost as much as like 17 million euros, 15.
Crank that up to 30.
Oh my God. See, I was looking at like Abrams sales and a lot of the unit figures. These are like refurbished tanks, so it would make sense. But a lot of the unit costs were coming out to like 17 to 18 million US dollars. So I am not surprised that nations are not gunning up to buy like hundreds of these and without like significant increases. You can't just buy more tanks. You have to buy more tank servicing vehicles. You have to stand up new units. You have to stand up new bases, new training courses, and all that stuff. So everything is already optimized for Europe to run at a okay level of tanks, which is fine. In total, I would say about 3 to 4,000 tanks if all of Europe squeeze it together. But when you look on the artillery side, it is very light. Like comparatively speaking, Europe has way less artillery systems than it should. And these are far cheaper systems. Sometimes even the high-end systems that have like auto loaders, computerized targeting systems, and all that stuff, and crew survivability being like one of the major factors for them, they still cost about 3 to 6 million. It's not really that expensive. So I am surprised
Here,
that
here, here again, I'm going to have to tell you to up the numbers because a PZH 2000 is about 21 million.
is this because of low unit orders?
This
Like,
is
is it
because of
really?
non existent unit orders.
So, relatively speaking, if the unit orders started to roll in to the expected levels,
Currently, the cheapest Western self propelled gun is going to be Caesar at roughly 5 million euros apiece.
that is not bad. What about the Archer, relatively speaking?
Archer is going to be, I think, 10 to 11. I'd have to look it up though. I know RCH 155 is coming in at about 12.
No. Well, still cheaper than a lot of the tanks out there. So, you would expect a little bit more of these orders. Because, like, technically speaking, like, if you look at, like, the size of European armies, their relative artillery to manpower size or army size is very small. They don't have a ton of artillery units, and it's incredibly, it's not good looking. And this is before you factor in the relative decreases that have happened when it comes to things like rocket artillery, which is also something that has not been updated in quite a long time. Yeah.
No, to go on and continue with our artillery debate, India has finally, after a long time, and probably too long of a time, placed an order for its ATAGS 155mm towed howitzers. Contracts for 307 guns and 327 6x6 trucks to tow them, with production to be split between Bharat Forge and Tata Advanced Systems, with a contract value of roughly 744 million euros. Overall, the ATAGS is heavily inspired by the Swedish FH-77B. So it does have limited self-propelled capability, but it's primarily still intended to be used as a towed gun. There's also rumblings inside India that they're likely going to be awarding a second contract for 100 K9s as well in the near future. So about 400 new artillery systems for India in the near future. Then we have Poland finally signing its contract for Borsuk, and I see I made a typo on the PowerPoint slide. That's supposed to be 111, not 11. For 111 units, Poland does have a framework agreement with HSW for roughly 1,400 vehicles, of which 1,000 are IFV variants and 400 are support variants. These 111 vehicles are currently contracted for delivery between 2025 and 2029, which is a longer delivery time frame than they originally expected. So again, Polish industry still has to gear up to produce the vehicle, likely has to build new facilities to do so. So I do expect them to need about a year or two to actually get production going. After which I do expect to see additional contracts. This contract was also valued at 1.55 billion euros, but is primarily just dedicated to the vehicles themselves. I've seen nothing of it including spare parts packages, industry training, simulators, or anything like that.
So I have a question on this contract. If it's going to take practically 5 to 4 years for them to deliver 100 or so vehicles, how long would it take then to execute the final quantity order that includes thousands of vehicles? Or are we looking at like production dates going into 2040s?
That's heavily going to depend on what production is going to look like once the facilities for it are actually established. This is very much an initial contract aimed at getting production going, but what they're planning on production capacity to be like is unknown at this point in time. So for all we know, they're going to be needing 2 years to get production of 60 units a year going, and then finish the contract delivery in 2 years. Or the production capacity they're setting up is going to be way higher, and additional contracts are going to follow with delivery in the same time period. All of these are things that we don't really have answers to at the moment, or at least I haven't found them yet. But Poland finally procuring Borsuk to replace their BMP-1 fleet is something that has needed to happen for decades now. This then also brings me on to my last topic, which does somewhat fall into your ballpark because a new FrankenSAM has shown up in Ukraine. This time it's a Humvee with 2 R-73s on the back, and is interestingly also a new cab.
Yeah, I saw pictures of that. It is so tiny. Dare I say, it looks adorable, but it, I would say that, it kind of highlights the desperation out there on the battlefield, a real need for, uh, you know, air defense systems. We have been getting footage upon footage for what has has to be at least 9 months from the front, showing the Su-25s flying really low over the front line, which really highlights just a sheer lack of any sort of short range systems to dissuade these aircraft from flying so low, and the Russians from using systems like these, as opposed to what they used to do before with the UMPK systems, which would be launched from the Su-33s and other aircraft, other flanker variants, at great standoff distances. So now you have the situation where the Ukrainians are running out of, short-range air defense systems. That includes things like, some things of this sort, like the Avenger and things of,
It's going to be
systems
your
that.
OSAs, your OSA M's, your Strela 10 M's.
Yeah, even man pads in general, like those are not really around in the quantities they used to be. So, what is Ukraine to do? I guess the best and easiest solution would be then to take the thousands of Humvee trucks that have been donated and they're now familiar with, and putting a missile they have in a ton of stocks, the R-73, and using it in that manner. So yeah, this is innovation, to cope with problems that stem from the West's inability to give them the necessary amount of systems they need for this fight. So yeah, innovation being driven by, lack of proper donations.
I'd also like to link this back to Gravehawk, which we saw the UK show off a couple of weeks ago, which is basically the same concept but containerized
Hmm.
into a 20-foot shipping container.
And how many missiles was that carrying as opposed to this? I know this Humvee vehicle has only two of them.
That system also only had two ready missiles,
Okay. Yeah, it kind of
but
reminds
they're
me of
both
like.
using R-73s, which does indicate that Ukraine still has a considerable stockpile of those.
Yeah, in a way, it reminds me of the Chaparral that we have seen in the past, and Boeing has proposed in not that far in the past. I think like 6, 7, 8 years ago, they were proposing at like these defense shows, taking Avenger vehicles and giving them this modified turret that could mount four AIM-9s, as opposed to the current Stinger setup, which has eight of them. So they have been proposing things of that sort, and I'm kind of wondering if the Ukrainians have tried to broach Boeing or the West in general about looking into that, or perhaps trying to replicate something of that sort here, because increasing the number of missiles per vehicle would be great. It would increase the likelihood of these missiles actually hitting, given the kind of guidance setup they have to deal with right now, which is somewhat unoptimal, I would say. These missiles are meant to be launched from aircraft where they're being cued by a host of sensors, including radars, including infrared search and track systems, all coupled together, giving them the best kind of track quality by the time they acquire and are launched at the target. So that is virtually sort of non-existent. But then the ranges where they're engaging targets is also much shorter. But just having more systems per vehicle, I think, would be greater. So I really do wonder if we're going to be seeing future variants of this, like iterations where they put more and more of these on the Humvee vehicles. So I look forward to seeing if that happens.
Then we're going to be starting off with the PrSM contract, so I'm handing it off to you now.
Yes, so on March 28th, which was practically 2 days ago, a Friday, uh, the US Army awarded a $4.9 billion contract. This is a relatively large contract for the Increment 1 precision strike missiles to Lockheed Martin. These are the base range variants, the 500-kilometer versions of the precision strike missile. As we all know, the precision strike missile is succeeding the Army's existing ATACMS missile, which has a range of about 300 kilometers. So this system increases that range by about 500 to 550. So an extra 200 to 250 kilometers on top of the ATACMS systems that are currently in use with the U.S. Army and a bunch of partner nations. The slight, advantage increase, not just the range over ATACMS, is the fact that uh, the ATACMS pod can now carry two of these systems, which means something like the M270 can now carry four of these, and while something like the HIMARS can carry two of these. So a great step up, and Lockheed Martin has been getting a trickle of smaller contracts over time for the early production lots, the early as they call it, early operational capability variants, those are EOC variants that they've been getting contracts in, like a bunch of them, like 50 to 60 to 100 of them. So now this is the big contract that we've all been waiting for a long time. This contract covers about 3,986 missiles, if I recall correctly, on the Army's objective, like quantity objectives that they're after for this specific Increment 1 variant. So later on, there will be newer increments of the precision strike missiles, some that have longer ranges, some that have alternate propulsion systems that allow them to achieve these longer ranges, and some of them are going to be after completely different target sets. So they're going to have like different seekers, they're going to be able to execute moving targets, they're going to be able to hit moving maritime targets, and relocatable land systems such as air defenses, communication vehicles, and things of that sort, like jamming vehicles and things of that sort. So this is a major step for the precision strike missile, which is a program that has been doing relatively great as far as all things are considered when you look at the U.S. Army's recent programs. So big contract for Lockheed Martin, and a major step up for the U.S. Army as well. From that, we will move on a little bit to the one of the biggest news pieces we got last week, which
No,
was the
but before we move on, I'd like to say that this is the 3,000 plus unit procurement of the system.
Mhm.
In increment 1 alone is a massive step up from for example, the USA's current ATACM stockpile.
Yes.
Do you expect this to grow by a considerable larger degree going into increment 2 or different variants?
So right now, with this new system, with the base increment, the JAS, the precision strike missile is rather an expensive system, and I think the goal would be to reduce the price as much as possible to such high scale production levels. I would expect the average price of the system to be reduced by 30%, maybe 40% with this, such high lot order. Uh, but the follow-on variants, such as the increment 2, the increment 3, so the ones that have the extended range that goes all the way out to 1,000 kilometers, and the ones that have the what is it called, the seekers, the multi-mode seekers that are capable of discriminating against anti-ship systems like ground-based air defenses that are trying to relocate and go after those targets and hit them sufficiently. Those are not going to be cheap. They're going to be far more expensive. And what we've heard in the past, even though like precision strike missile news has kind of slowed down in terms of how they've been talking about the development of these systems, what we've been hearing through the grapevine has been that the later variants that are coming for the precision strike missile might be very different. For example, I've heard that one of the 1,000-kilometer range variants might go back to the old ATACMS setup where you have a one missile per pod, which would make sense. The range has, been doubled, maybe even increased even further than that. What they've mentioned as a baseline has been 1,000 kilometers, but it could be further than that. So yeah, I don't expect the special variants, the increment 2 and the increment 3, to be procured in the quantities you're witnessing here. This is already a major step up over all the ATAGS by the US has done, which amounts to about 2,000, 2,500 at max. So this is like twice that already. When you go into the special variant, I don't expect there to be a lot of them. And that's just because there isn't really going to be the use case for, to have that many systems, or have a use for so many systems of that kind. The US Army is also procuring a number of really long range systems. You have the Typhoon system, which is capable of launching the Standard Missile 6, and the Tomahawk land attack cruise missile, which has a range of about 1,600 kilometers. Then you go over that, you have the long range hypersonic weapon system. That is the system with like plus 2,700 kilometer range. So this fits into the medium range, like lower than that. It bridges the gap between Precision Strike Missile Increment 1 and the Tomahawks and the Standard Missile 6s. So I don't expect there to be a ton of these systems to be procured, the later increments at least. A ballpark guess would be like 1,000 of them would make sense. So not a huge order, but the increment 1, that is a major, major step up.
Then we can move into your bigger news topic.
Yes, so last week we got one of the biggest pieces of news, like defense news, that we will probably get in, who knows, maybe a few more weeks before they announce the other contract. But I would say we have gotten in the past decade, plus minus the B-21 unveiling. So on March 21st, the US Air Force selected Boeing as the winner of its manned component of its next generation air dominance or NGAD program. So this is you have the NGAD program, which is a family of systems, and within it you have the penetrating counter air, which is the actual manned program within that, or what traditionally we will call the fighter program. So they selected Boeing as the winner of that manned component. The program originally started off as a three-way competition between the three defense giants that make fighter aircraft in the United States. So you had Northrop Grumman, you had Boeing, and then you had Lockheed Martin. It was revealed to us in early 2025, around March, or no, perhaps a bit earlier, but around the beginning of this year, that Northrop Grumman had dropped out. Sorry, it was early 2024, not 2025. That Northrop Grumman had indeed dropped out of the program, and we now know why that was. Apparently, according to the former Secretary of the U.S. Air Force, Frank Kendall, they submitted a bid, and as the program went through its phases, the U.S. Air Force determined that what they were offering was no longer meeting the program requirements, and as such, Northrop left the program so that they could focus on the U.S. Navy's NGAD program, which has its own thing going on. So then the program came down to two competitors, Lockheed Martin and Boeing. A lot of people were expecting Lockheed Martin to take the win here because of their years upon years of experience with working with stealth aircraft going back to the F-117. So it was heavily implied that Lockheed would basically just take this. But then in early 2024, again, we started getting this news that Boeing was actually offering something extremely competitive that was impressing the US Air Force. And after that, we really didn't get much news, and it was a lot of discussions about how many demonstrators, prototype aircrafts that have been funded, and a lot of people were kind of going over other things. And during that period, we had this surprise moment where, well, it was not really a surprise, but it was still kind of shocking, where the former Secretary of the U.S. Air Force, Frank Kendall, paused the program so that it could be reviewed. And this added, a 6 to 9 month extra length to the contract when it was supposed to be awarded, which was like summer of 2024. So everybody was worried what was going on. And ultimately, what it came down to was that the US Air Force did not have the money it needed. Or at least now we know, as clearly as it can be stated, that the US Air Force did not have the money it needed to execute this program. From what we've been seeing through the budget submissions, this program is going to cost $20 billion over the coming 5 years just for engineering, manufacturing, and development. So this is before you even get to procuring all of the aircraft they want. This is just going through the paces of developing and going through the paces of setting up production, getting everything ready for this aircraft. It is going to take 20 billion. And when you put that aside, how much the US Air Force is already spending on programs such as the B-21, on programs such as the E-7, the T-7, the
The F
GPSD,
35.
yes, the Block 4 F-35, GPSD, so the next generation, ICBM that will replace the 50-year-old minimum threes, it all just adds up. And the US Air Force does not really have a huge procurement fund in terms of like what their procurement budget looks like. It's relatively small. So you can't really fit all these things together. And then situation came, how can you move forward with such a program? How can you award such a contract when all the budget outlooks going for like the future years defense program, so 5 years, highlight uh, a decrease in spending. And this was when we were going through two cycles of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which set a cap, which was a bipartisan bill that was passed in Congress, that set a cap to how much they could request in terms of budget funding. So they looked at it, and it was just not feasible. They could not do it, and they had to pause the program for a little bit so that they can look back and decide, is this something they can move forward with? Do they have to redesign it? Do they have to go for other capabilities? And Frank Kendall said in like a podcast a few days ago, like 3 days ago, on the Defense Aerospace podcast, the in recent interview, he discussed that the Air Force had a lot of other priorities that it had to take care of, and NGAD was one of them. And it can't just select NGAD; it has to field all these things. They all have to be fielded. They all have to come because they're all supporting NGAD. So the program was paused, and they reassessed it. They came to the same conclusion, which was, yes, the Air Force needs to procure this aircraft. It fits into the architecture they're looking into, which was obvious. But then, by that time, the Biden administration was going out of office. A new administration was coming in, and that is not a decision you can make at the final tail end of such an administration. It's a very big decision to commit to that. So they left it be. They said, okay, we're gonna pass the ball to the next administration. They get to decide whether or not they move forward with this contract. And come March 21st, the U.S. Air Force selected Boeing as the winner, and they're moving forward with the program. The aircraft will be known as the F-47. Very weird naming scheme, which continues the
Yeah,
mistakes we made with the
skipping a lot of numbers there,
a lot,
potentially to
but
stroke one specific ego.
indeed, indeed, but they had a very good reasoning for it, which was a bit surprising. To me, it seems like an afterthought, which was that it celebrates 1947, which is when the US Air Force became its own separate thing, which, that might have been the actual reason. We do not know, but I highly doubt that. And I think we don't need to state the obvious here, but I think we all know, both you listeners and us, why that, F-47 was picked. So the Boeing decision then came to as a surprise to a lot of people, especially in the defense commentary community. A lot of people, I'm pretty sure you've seen a lot of people. Well, there were a lot of people talking about, whether or not it has canards and things of that sort. And I think that is not really important. I don't think these artist renderings we're seeing are finalized designs, and we can think about that later. But the other big thing was why Boeing had gotten this contract. I think I've seen so many reasons as to why. Some of them range from completely deranged things like, Boeing had to be favored, things of that sort. And
Because otherwise, Boeing would go out of business, points at civilian aircraft.
but Frank Kendall was also talking about this, and they kind of asked. So one of the reasons, some of the reasons I've come across for why people think this happened, included things ranging from like, Boeing was going to go out of business if this did not happen, to things such as, well, Boeing obviously underbid significantly. This is something they've done with other programs, which is costing them billions upon billions of losses. So others included they underbid. Others included, might be not the Air Force did not make a good judgment, so their judgment might have been clouded and things of that sort. But I think it ultimately comes down to two things. Yes, if Boeing did not win this contract, their fighter development, uh, generations of things of that sort might have been done, but not in the way that people envision. So I don't think they were going to go out of business or whatever, but I think they were going to have a very, very rough 10 to 15 years. So yeah, they have the F-15EX right now, which is expected to be about a production run of 104, at least for the US Air Force, which is the biggest buyer. But there's also the Israelis. The Israeli Air Force is looking at it. There was some speculation that the Poles might be looking at it too. But as far as I know, uh, what is confirmed so far is the order for the Israelis and then the order for the US Air Force going forward. And those are not a lot of aircraft. So you're potentially looking at production stopping of that system at the end of this decade. Then you had the Super Hornet, which is already winding down production. The production line is supposed to cease operation in 2027, I think. They have already gotten contract to kind of start the process of dismantling the production line for that aircraft. So if Boeing did not win this contract to develop this fighter aircraft, then it would have been time out for them for at least a few more years, at least a decade, maybe a decade and a half. So that is why. So when Frank Kendall was talking about this, he mentioned this, that the fact that given the stakes Boeing had to deal with, they tried harder, which is something I genuinely believe. I genuinely believe that Boeing tried as hard as they could to get as serious as possible to offer the best product. And they went far and beyond to get or to design the best thing they could for this program. I think they put everything they had behind it, and clearly it worked in their favor. We've also seen reporting discussing things of that sort, saying that the Lockheed design was a bit conservative. Uh, we don't know what that exactly means. Frank Kendall has sort of tried to refute that by saying both of them offered something unique, interesting. That was he said it was a very close competition, and ultimately Boeing came out on top on their merits, on the merits of their aircraft, the aircraft they offered. A lot of other people have said things like, well, they have high production capacity, they have industrial capacities. And as far as I know, the former, Secretary of the Air Force, who knows a lot more about this than any other person out there right now, has straight up said that was not a deciding factor. The only deciding factor in this program was how good the product was and how it compared to the competition. A lot of people have also brought out the fact that Boeing has been struggling with the T7. They've been struggling with the E7, which has been delayed. The Apaches have been delayed. The T7 has been delayed significantly. The F-15EX have been delayed. The KC-46 have been delayed. But I feel like these people are overlooking, uh, you know, Lockheed's issues. The Block 4 F-35s have been delayed significantly. They were stockpiling aircraft in 2024 because they could not go through the flight testing program fast enough to deliver these aircraft, and they had to stockpile them. The program is like 17 billion above what it needs to be right now. So it's not like exactly Lockheed has a very good, amazing track record. The F-35 program has been not it hasn't been an easy program. It has been absolute headache for those of us who pay attention to defense procurement. So this was also something that was brought up to the Secretary of the Air Force, and he said, well, sure, they take into account things of this sort, but you know, you can't really be out there casting these stones when, Lockheed also has these problems. And a ton of other aircraft manufacturers are having these delay problems, these scheduling problems, and things of that sort. So, yeah, I genuinely think Boeing offered a good product. It was highly competitive. The US Air Force liked it, and now the US Air Force has picked it. Uh, how it gets executed in the near future, though, and how well Boeing can deliver on the promises, that's a different question. And I think that's something that is definitely up in the air. I think, due to the weight, like the sheer magnitude of this contract, they're going to try their best to deliver what was bestowed about them to deliver to the U.S. Air Force. I think they're going to try their best to do that, but it remains to be seen. So moving from this NGAD program to another NJAD program, which is spelled the same but is pronounced differently.
Pronounced
NJAD instead
differently
of
and is a completely different thing because we can't ever make things simple here.
yes. So this is the U.S. Navy's program. The manned component of it is called the FAXX, and Northrop Grumman, when it dropped out or you know left the U.S. Air Force NGAD program, publicly announced, I think the CEO in early 2024, that they were putting all their effort and focusing on the Navy NGAD and trying to win that program. And in March of like 5th of March this month, we got news that Lockheed had a similar situation as Northrop Grumman did with the U.S. Air Force program, where Lockheed offered something, the Navy looked at it, they were not impressed, it did not go forward, and then Lockheed dropped out. So now that competition is down to Northrop Grumman versus Boeing. And we're already getting news that Boeing might be favored there, but then we're also getting news that Northrop Grumman is potentially offering a very competitive product, which would not be surprising because they said they were going to put all their weight behind this program and try to get, focus all their attention on this program, which is why, they quickly, silently bowed out of the US Air Force NGAD. But for Boeing to
So,
win both of these
so
would
what's the
be,
over under on a Boeing sweep?
I don't know, the chances. Early on I would have said low tens. Now it seems more like the mid 40s, mid 50s, like 50-50. So it would be amazing. Genuinely, I think it would be amazing, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think Boeing earned enough of a, and I think they're just going to leave it at that. Not only because would it be absurd, but because uh, this would be too much risk for them. I think for them to manage two different competing programs that have somewhat different requirements at the same time, trying to execute both of them, I think that would be, I don't think it's been done before, and I think it would be very difficult for them to try to do something like that, especially because of how new, how different, and how different technological maturity speaking in terms of these programs. They're risky programs, and I think two programs at the same time might be too much risk for Boeing to execute. But I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But what about you? What do you think?
If Boeing were to win both, they'd likely have to absorb someone just for the R&D,
Yeah.
basically just the R&D scale that two fighter programs would entail.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it would be insane. But one thing I would add is, these programs, at least the way the U.S. Air Force has talked about it, is NGADs are going to be very different from how past traditional fighter programs have been run. There's not going to be a winner-take-all situation. Even with, the F-22 and the F-35, it was never really a winner-take-all situation. The F-22, even though, Northrop lost out there, Boeing was second major subcontractor or contractor when it came to building the F-22. For the F-35, it was Northrop Grumman. So potentially, what we could be looking at,
Is a
with
more collaborative effort of the entire US aviation industry.
yes, absolutely, which is how I would like people to see this, not through the lens of Boeing takes all, but even putting that aside, the way Frank Kendall has talked about this has been that there's going to be multiple increments of NGAD. They don't know yet how that is going to work, but they're looking at it potentially in a situation where they might order like 100 aircraft and then they recompete. They try to select another, they do another competition again, and in that competition they might select a different company. So it's not like if you don't win this program, you're completely locked out of the fighter programs for 30 years, which is traditionally what has happened. But a lot of companies have had other things to do in the meantime, through just the process of the US Air Force and the US Navy procuring like many different aircraft. But now it's not going to be like, well, if you don't get this, then you're done. Like, hi, bye bye, see you 2060. It's not really like that. So they're going to be trying to recompete. They don't know yet how it's going to go, but from what I've understood and the way he has talked about it, is they're going to be going through multiple increments. And the second thing I would go to is there's also the CCA, the Collaborative Combat Aircraft of this, like the unmanned aspect of NGAD. So the PCA and the FAXX are going to be the manned platforms within these NGAD programs, and you're going to have a bunch of unmanned aircraft all working together to aid these, you know, manned systems. This is why the procurement numbers for these new generation of aircraft are going to be so low. We're talking, you know, 150 to 180 for the US Air Force, 300-ish for the US Navy. So you're going to need to complement that with more F-35s, and even the F-35s are going to be needing unmanned aircraft to support them, and even some of the fourth generation aircraft. So that is also another, avenue of competition companies have. The current round of CCA contracts within the US Air Force's NGAD program did not go to the major primes. They went to Anduril and General Atomics. So who knows what increment 2 is going to look like? We don't know yet. Some have hinted that it might be cheaper. Some have hinted that the US Air Force might be looking at something more expensive. And then you go to the US Navy CCA. How is that going to look like? So all of these companies then have, other potential ways of sustaining orders and keeping their schedules busy. And being honest, Northrop Grumman has B-21, and then, Lockheed Martin has 1,000 or so F-35s to go through. So it's not like they're losing big out here to the extent that Boeing is. If they did not, if Boeing did not win, I think they would be losing far more. So that is, my general take on the whole NGAL situation. Do you have anything to add?
Not really, no. Other than it might have something to do with the canards.
uh, that topic, I don't want to broach it. I don't want to touch it. I think we should all just. I think we should all just wait. The memes have been great. I will tell you that the memes have been great, and everybody has been reposting it. It's kind of funny how like we've had this switching in the defense online commentary situation. We've kind of had this like flip of like people have the way they discuss. Like for years, people have been saying that the J-20 is not very stealthy because it has canards, and now it's the reverse, where the other side is saying, well, the F-47, if it does have canards, does not really count as a true sixth generation aircraft because it has canards, as opposed to the
And
the
canards can't
newly
be
announced.
stealthy.
You know, so they're saying these things. It's like they've switched positions. So, but we will see. I don't think the designs, at least what we see, might be what it actually looks like. So I'll just give it more time until we have the public unveiling, or as we see like a flight demonstration, which might take maybe 2 more years before we actually see the real thing.
Oh, now we have one more topic from you.
Yeah. So moving on from this to something completely different. On the 24th, so last week, a lot of major things were happening the past 2 weeks. So on the 24th of March, the US Navy and the what am I saying? The US Navy and the Missile Defense Agency carried out FTX 40. This was an observation exercise involving Type 5 medium range ballistic missile target. This target was carrying a hypersonic target vehicle on top of it. So this test involved DDG-91 USS Pinckney, which acted as like an observation and tracking vessel. So what it was doing was they were firing this target vehicle, and the USS Pinckney was out there observing this target. On top of that, the vessel carried out a simulated interception, which was, they went through the whole process of what it takes to ready a missile, cue a target, and all of these procedures using the live tracking data from the ballistic missile target they fired, and then they simulated firing a virtual missile, a simulated missile. This was an SM-6 IAU. This is like the latest upgraded variant, and they use that tracking data to um, simulate an interception, which seems to have gone successfully, because the press news does not really say it went any other way. It went okay. So this test has been long anticipated. This test was originally set to occur in 2023. The Missile Defense Agency, former MDA head, Vice Admiral John Hill, announced this test during a Senate hearing on May 2022, discussing this test. This is supposed to be one of two tests that, one of many tests where the US Navy and the MDA are kind of collaborating in a way to develop a rigorous system for tracking, testing, and building targets that are capable of simulating hypersonic threats. These are threats that are proliferating around the world. A lot of nations, such as China and Russia, have these systems in service in the form of like the Dongfeng 17 and a bunch of other systems out there. But the problem has been that the US has ballistic missile targets. They go through them pretty often, but it has nothing to simulate hypersonics. Its sensors are capable of doing that digitally, but realistically, physically, they don't have anything of the sort, and they haven't really. They have sometimes participated in tests of like real life, hypersonic demonstrations, such as the air-launched rapid response weapon and things of that sort. But these are weapon development programs, so what you can do and how you can observe these targets are a bit different, and these targets might not have a similar performance to what threats the United States faces. So FTX 40 was part of this effort to test this missile out, and for one of the US Navy's Aegis vessels to observe it and then try to engage it virtually. And the test went successfully. It was originally set to occur 2 years ago. It was delayed again to 2024. Then delayed again to 2025, which is when it occurred. This test is supposed to have another test following it, which is called FTM-43. That actual test is going to involve live interceptions. So they're going to be firing two SM-6s at an actual hypersonic target, which is going to be atop another MRBM, perhaps Type 5 vehicle, and they're going to try to intercept that. During these tests, they've been using this hypersonic target vehicle. Not really much is known about it, and I haven't really seen other people discuss it. But from what I have gleaned from reading about this through the budget documents, through the hearings, is that HTV-1, the hypersonic target vehicle 1, which was involved in the recent test that took place last week, this is more like something that is capable of emulating maneuvering renter vehicles, like the systems you'd see atop Dongfeng 21 and Dongfeng 26, or the US's Pershing 2. So these are like maneuvering renter vehicles, but they don't maneuver throughout their entire flight path. They kind of maneuver at the terminal end of it. So they're not really true hypersonic glide vehicles in the literal sense, something like the Dongfeng 17 or the airline's rapid response weapon, but they are still maneuvering targets, and this is not something that the SM-6 has been tested against in the past. So they have now gone through this, and now they're developing the hypersonic target vehicle 2, which is what is actually going to go aboard the MRBM target they're going to be using for FTM-43. So that is going to be the major test. It's going to take place in 2026, second quarter of 2026. So maybe around June-ish after that is when it's going to take place, if everything goes well.
If everything goes well, being the important
essentially.
part.
Yeah, because
I couldn't think of the word. English
yes,
second language moment.
yes, this is a very, it's all down to the schedule, and the schedule has not been very forgiving to the Missile Defense Agency. A lot of these tests have been delayed. So it would not surprise me if this got delayed, but I hope not, because they have to validate this missile and get it out there, because currently this is the only interim counter-hypersonic missile in US service. So there is nothing else out there to counter these systems that both the Chinese and the Russians are mass fielding right now. There are multiple Dongfeng 17 brigades. The Chinese are building more of them every year. And for US forces in the Indo-Pacific, there's not a single system, aside from the Standard Missile 6, that can counter this. So there is an ongoing program called the Glide Phase Interceptor, which is supposed to be a purpose-built missile that will be like designed to engage these glide vehicles at extended ranges over what is currently possible on the SM-6 and other missiles such as the PAC-3. But that program has gone through a rough patch. It was originally supposed to enter service sometime in 2028. Now that has been pushed back to 2033. But ever since then, I think the last hearing was like 2024, 2023. The date has been like just indefinitely shifted into the indefinite future. So sometime in the 2030s, basically. It's a joint program between Japan and the United States, which is how a ton of these, a ton of like MDA programs have gone, such as the SM-3, which is like jointly funded. The costs are shared between Japan and the United States. The technology is shared too. So same same event is happening here with the Glide Phase Interceptor, and so we're going to see how that develops. But that missile is not going to be ready for another 15 years, 10 years maybe. So the US has to get something that works out there right now, very soon. Moving on to, another MDA related, ballistic missile related topic, we recently got reports from Israeli media that the Patriot battery that has been deployed to what Patriot? That battery that has been
I
deployed
was
to,
about to say Patriot.
I don't know if Patriot batteries are deployed there. Could be. We don't know. They're actually moving a ton of them into the theater. But the THAAD battery that has been deployed to Israel since October 2024 has since then intercepted 6 ballistic missiles launched by the Houthis from Yemen. The last 2 took place basically 2 days ago on, I think, March 27th, where it intercepted 2 Houthi MRBMs over Israel. So that system has been in place for, since October, and it has been speculated that the Israelis are running down on the number of ballistic missiles the ballistic missile defense systems they have, due to 2 relatively large attacks that the Iranians carried out in response to the multiple assassinations done by the Israelis. So, yeah, they're running out of missiles, and the US has had to deploy a counter system to take up some of the load that they've been facing. And it's now since been reported that THAAD has engaged successfully 6 ballistic missiles. So, big development for that system, which has had a shaky development, but a very great testing record, and is now demonstrating a very great operational success rate relative to other, ballistic missile interception systems such as the Patriot and Israeli systems such as the Arrow 3, the Arrow 2, and David Sling. So that is kicking ass in Israel. And with that, I conclude my section of the podcast. These are the topics that I have prepared for you guys this episode, and now that is over. So, moving back to you, Jeff, what do you have to add?
Well, we now move into the final 2 segments of the podcast, which are going to be the last 2 weeks in Ukraine aid, where we basically had our monthly German update, which got us 24 FFG MRAPs, which are basically BAT UMGs produced by FFG in Germany. 3 Gepards, likely going to be the Cheetah variant, which seems to have been jointly procured from Jordan by the US and Germany. 2 OSINT 1 either mine clearance tanks or armored recovery vehicles. They're not specific on the variant, and we've seen both in service in Ukraine. And 2 border protection vehicles, which is basically just a fancy term for vehicles that used to be in service with border protection agencies in Europe and have been donated to Ukrainian border guards. We also had the appearance of a OSINT 1 MLU from Denmark in Ukraine. We had known for about a year now that Denmark donated a number of OSINT 1s to Ukraine, but only now did I actually see a picture of it. Only for when I send out the update, someone to comment that it had shown up like months ago and I just missed it. Another confirmation of older aid is from Spain, where we got the confirmation that they have delivered a total of 10 105-14 Automalara M56 pack howitzers to Ukraine. Potentially higher, that number's potentially higher, but this is just the confirmation those were exported to Ukraine in 2023. Lastly, we have a Polish WTZ-3M armored recovery vehicle, which is the armored recovery vehicle based on the PT-91. Show up in Ukraine after a couple of months ago, we got news that the vehicle had been codified for Ukrainian service. we've had no new pledges of aid since the last podcast episode recording. Which then brings us to our viewer submitted questions, which is only one this time, but this is pretty much just addressed to me because it's ground stuff. You mentioned the possibility of Germany ordering more Pumas to free up mortars for Ukraine. Do you think something similar could happen with remaining Leopard 2A6, with cancelling the upgrades to Leopard 2A7V and instead ordering new build 2A8s help with industry scale and delivery time of those existing 2A8 orders? So a couple things to unpack here. 2A7Vs are not direct upgrades. The 2A7V receives a new hull because Leopard 2A6 hulls are too worn out to be upgraded to 2A7V standard. The 2A7A1 is, however, uses an upgraded A6 hull, but the A7V receives a completely new hull. I am also not expecting Germany to replace their remaining 2A6 fleet anytime soon, at least not until they've run through the course of the Leopard 2AX program, which is basically a Leopard 2 that integrates some of the already mature technologies being developed for what was it called again? The joint French-German development program.
Was it MGCS?
Oh yeah, MGCS, that was it. This is why we need a co-host. Yeah, some of the already mature technologies being developed for MGCS are expected to be integrated onto Leopard 2AX, and that is likely going to be what replaces the last about 100 Leopard 2A6 in German service. So I wouldn't expect additional 2A8 orders from Germany to replace the 2A6 until we have more clarity on 2AX. So with that, that's going to conclude our second episode. Thank you all for watching, and we'd hope to see you all again for our third episode in about 2 weeks' time.
Before we cut off, I would like you guys to send in the questions. We need more questions. We need to go through your questions. Whenever we used to host these on Twitter, we used to get like so many questions, like 15, 16, 17 of them. So bring in those questions.
I know if you have a question for us, feel free to either put them in the comments of the YouTube video, submit them free through our Discord server, in which I've set up a special channel for that, or just put them under the social media posts announcing the upload of this episode.
Yes, please do that. Send us your questions. We would like to know, and we'd like to answer them. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jeff, for doing the job of recording this week.